So, well read, what are we talking about today?
Today we're talking about Absolute Batman issue 4, which takes a little bit of a step back in the series and does a flashback into this Batman's origins. We get to know his father a little bit and the relationship with Batman. We get a little bit of insight into his engineering ability and what his views are on society. He visits the wealthy, he fends for the poor, and he, of course, fights the dirty criminals. This Batman goes through several phases of discovery. He starts off as a vampire like figure, gnawing the necks of his targets, but
All
then
true.
eventually, eventually settles on an aspirational representation of Batman, a very unusual and new perspective on the figure. So, guys, what did you think of Absolute Batman issue 4?
So I'm new to, as you guys know, to mainstream stuff in general. I wasn't reading things off from my local comic shop until high school, and I was just reading Star Wars stuff, and that was the first time that I ever saw uh, an artist change up in a particular run, and I had no idea what was going on. I got genuinely confused. I had to go back to the shop and say, "Hey, did I get the right thing? Is this supposed to happen? Is this something that is done?" It I just didn't know that it was something that would ever happen, and I learned to appreciate that obviously artists have, careers and things happen and people get, switched up on a run. And once I got used to that, because I did grow up on it, I've started to appreciate what the wrinkles that it kind of does to a run, and actually how interesting things can kinda happen from that, that's not in the script, that wasn't planned, wasn't part of the IP. Uh, you know, nobody expected this to happen, but just like emergent kind of details kind of happen to a story. And it starts to feel like you're revisiting, maybe reflecting on where the arc is going so far with a particular run when you get a new artist. That's the impression I always get. It just feels like now we're getting a new flavor to the story. And this has a decidedly different flavor, I think. It feels visually, it feels more like an Image comic than DC, I think, and that makes me completely it just kinda retools where we've gotten so far, from the previous 3 issues to here. It feels more, contemplative, even though I think, I went back and I checked the other issues, it feels I mean, it's got the same amount of text, and obviously, on paper, this should have been the exact same, it should just feel like a continuation, but with a different artist, it feels, more somber. It feels in a way, it feels a little darker just because it's more reserved. It doesn't have that, there was a kind of a heroic, there was an attempt at like a, uh, adventurous, exoticism, I don't know, with some of the stylization that we got in the first 3 issues. This would because it feels a little more maybe comics with an X, like it's a different register that's just being met with this artist. It I forgot I was reading a superhero comic at all for the most part. It almost felt like we were doing some sort of, possibly at least a critical revisit of what superheroism is. And this is all again, this is just because a different artist got brought on, and nobody's trying to be cynical or subversive, I think, about Batman on paper, but the different artist gives you that different, it makes you second guess what you've just read in the previous issues, I think, when you switch from the artist that we did have, whose name is escaping me, to this kind of register of an artist. I just thought that was really interesting, and whereas in the first 3 issues, I was convinced like you guys, you brought me on to this idea that you can kind of break a superhero and you could have fun, and we're in an absolute universe that possibly doesn't matter. It might matter in the future with multiverse stuff, but I think by issue 4 with this artist, it goes so far that now I'm just kind of interested in the story as is, and I'm not interested in these heroes and villains. And that's probably that's probably a problem given that this is a DC issue and I'm supposed to care about Batman. Uh, I don't really care about Batman right now, just because of the artistic direction that we've taken, and the fact that we're revisiting and retooling so many details of who Batman is. I'm just kind of interested in the character interactions. That feels like that's not the place DC would want me to be. I think, even if technically I'm enjoying this particular issue. So that's my hot take.
Let's take a brief pause to hear from the awesome creators joining us today and find out what cool projects they're currently working on.
Hey guys, if you love sword and sandal historical fiction with a healthy dose of ancient Roman and Egyptian fantasy mixed in, then check out Kyrie. We've got 450 pages printed so far, a fourth book on the way. Order your books today at curiecomic.com.
Modern day, classic superhero storytelling. Get The Adventures of Omega Girl, issues 1 through 5, now on Indie Planet.
Thank you to our awesome creators, and now back to the video.
I have to say that I just cannot brook with Florida slander. So this book slandered Florida, and
It did.
I have to defend Florida's honor.
That's
Uh,
right.
the book was like, so how are the drugs and guns getting into Gotham? And it's because, well, you see, Florida doesn't have as strict laws as we do about drugs and guns, and so they go through the Orange Blossom pipeline or something.
What is
And
Florida? What is Gotham in Canada or something?
and the idea was that, well, those it's so much easier to get, contraband in Florida. Those silly Floridians, and they smell like oranges when they get here to Gotham. And I was
You
just like,
It just
you
felt Hispanic coded. I feel
you
like
got
we're
to you got to be really scummy if like Gotham City is calling you a scumbag city.
right,
It's like,
exactly, yeah,
yeah,
that's exactly it. It's like,
good
well,
point.
at least the hoity-toits in Gotham are
yeah.
looking snubbing their nose at the Floridians, and I will not stand for this. So, which is because isn't I think technically the way it's usually been said is that Metropolis is New York by day, and Gotham is New York by night. That's the way the classic understanding of DC that they've
Makes
had of
sense.
it. I think they've also sometimes have understood it as Metropolis is more, I think, New York, and maybe Gotham is more Chicago or something like that. I think that might be another one. But either way, why do you gotta hate on Florida? So that one stuck out to me, as someone who has some strong love for that state. But I feel what you're putting down there, Matt. I am a little concerned when we get to a superhero book and we forget that it's a superhero book. But
I
I
can see that would be an issue. Yeah.
I do have to point out one thing that is important, which is during Chris Claremont's X-Men, he would have moments where he would just have them go out into the city, and for a chunk of the story, while the X-Men are maybe fighting a villain in one part, we're watching Kitty Pryde try on clothes with Storm. It was actually something that was pushed back against when people like Jim Lee and Liefeld took control of the book later on, because they said they were tired of watching Kitty Pryde go on shopping trips. But Chris Claremont, in his there's a documentary called Chris Claremont's X-Men, where he talks about the fact that he had those characters for like almost 2 decades. It was about 18 years. And he said he kind of saw them as extensions of his own, of his children. They were kind of a family to him. And so when he wrote them, he was essentially just watching their lives. And they were just family that also happened to have superpowers and would get in superhero shenanigans. And one thing I will say is the fact that Chris Claremont's run was very beloved for the fact that there was a perceived balance between the superhero side and the civilian side, and that's also at the crux of the medium. People like Peter Coogan, a scholar who's written on this subject as well, have pointed this out. The fact of the matter is that the superhero has a foot in two worlds. See, that's why he has a secret identity, and having a secret identity is core to the character, which means you have a private life. You have a life that's not just superheroics. You have things that we connect to. It's why Spider-Man has been so popular, why all these other characters have been popular, is the fact that there's something in them that we can relate to. We relate to Peter Parker and his hapless life. We relate to Clark Kent trying to be a good old American boy. We admire and want to project a power fantasy on the superhero side, but we relate to the feat of clay. And so this issue is really spending the majority of it, not all of it, but the majority of it with that sense of a growing up Bruce Wayne. I think it was a little heavy-handed with the whole thing needed to be framed around the concept of a bat.
Yeah.
It's so funny how like the original Batman in Detective Comics, just he wanted to fight crime and he looked outside and said, you know what, a bat flies in and he says, you know what, that's an omen, I think I'll be a Batman. It's so incidental. And in this one it's like he has this whole school project and he's coming up with all these bridge designs because he's an engineer, and they really need to, so they have to marry the engineer side with the bat side, with his character development, with his father's side. And so it's a little contrived, but thematically I guess it works, and it definitely sells the idea of why this guy likes bats.
Yeah, contrived is the operative word. There's no connective tissue here. His virtues are all over the place. His morals are all over the place. His motivations are all over the place, and I don't get like a singular driving force behind why this character manifests into the bat figure that he embodies. The storyline with his father, I think, borrows way too heavily from the canonical Batman series. And here they're
Mhm.
trying to tread their own ground. They're building a bit of an alternate universe for Batman. They make little references to the Batman version that we know, where the father says, "Oh, if I were a surgeon, maybe in a different life, things would be totally different." Well, he's not. He's a teacher, and he was killed by some random crazed shooter in a zoo. So why is this Batman out fighting crime? Because the original Batman was motivated to stop random criminals that would just prey on people on the streets. And here we have an isolated incident of a psychopath who
Mass
has a
shooting, yeah.
mass shooting, which isn't the most common thing in the world.
Mm.
Maybe he should go after, I don't know. Maybe this is the Batman who's needs to fight for gun laws and go after the pharmaceutical companies for giving too many psychiatric drugs to
I think that's the
these
direction they're
persons.
taking,
Like,
because I think that's what they're kind of doing with that. I think that
Yeah.
whether or not we like that, I think what you're saying is exactly where Snyder's at. And that's why I think he puts those lines in about, oh well, Florida doesn't have, as strict laws as we do. And then the end, when he's overlooking the party and he's like, and that businessman did that ugly thing, and like I think that's actually the direction they're headed.
he's David Hogg. That's essentially the archetype that we're
Like,
crafting here.
David Hogg, if he actually lifted weights.
I guess.
Because
I guess.
this guy's at least jacked. He's built.
Yeah, I don't get it. I thought it was interesting though that Snyder wanted to make this representation of Batman aspirational, which he's never drawn that way. But I guess he wanted to toy with that idea that maybe the bat suit could be an aspirational thing, and so he gave us this much darker representation initially that this Batman had to move away from to figure out a little bit more of his grounding, what he wanted to stand for. I don't quite understand why he wants to fight for the working class, why he hates the businessmen, because that there was a little bit of time spent on that, and I don't really see a motivation there at all. So he just seems to have his virtues darting in every direction. And when you look at how the issue culminates, the climax of the entire storyline, it's him confronting the killer of his father. So
Mhm.
all of these misdirections and tangents that he goes on, only to come back to the original point of something horrific happened to him. That's really what's driving him. That should have been the main focus of all of his decision making, and not all of these sidebars that seem to not go anywhere, but kind of create a mosaic for us of what this Batman is supposed to be as a societal commentary rather than an actual character in a storyline undergoing a horrific experience and reeling from the consequence of that.
Well, they are going in a very different direction, in the sense that where this issue ends, and I'll have to see where the next issue goes before I can say how I feel about it. But the arc he goes through in the story, as a character, like underneath, reading between the lines, essentially, right? He starts off as being a young man who says, "I hate you," and he ends the story with, you know, "I'm here to listen to your side of things." And he has that sort of like
Yep.
closed fist moment, and then he has like an opening of his eyes, like literally like unclenches his face and says, "Well, you had something you wanted to say," and that is a
That's
mirror of
interesting.
what it's a mirror of what he did earlier, which when he's younger, and he's like, saying, "I hate you. I don't want to listen to anything you have to say." And so he's then he's literally listening to what the pharmaceutical rep type people, like the elites, and what they're saying. He doesn't like what they have to say. He clearly sees them as being at the root of the corruption and evil in the city, and he wants to build bridges. It's literally like the whole thing's a giant metaphor for build. The whole issue is a giant metaphor for bridge building, right?
Yeah, you were
So
saying the incidental inspiration for the original Batman was a bat. Apparently, for this one, it's a
it's a
bridge, but it
bridge, yeah.
happens to look like a
It
bat.
happens to look like a bat. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the contrived part. But the what Snyder's attempt, what I think we can clearly see with what Snyder's setting up here is this idea of bridging, between what uh, the true uh, causes of crime and the symptoms, I guess, of it. And so he needs to go and have an open-minded, open-hearted talk with this mass shooter to figure out what's really gone wrong in society so we can cure the real sickness. And the real sickness, of course, is going to be the rich elites. So like, which is something which we've seen in the previous issues. That's
Yep.
what he's setting up. So
He's a
it's
bat therapist.
it's definitely taking this the character in this new direction that's, at least I would say, relevant
Yes.
in to the current zeitgeist of how people feel towards
It is.
institutions of power, or at least how some people feel about it. So again, I don't know if I really am undecided of how I feel about this. I think we're headed into where I'm either going to be okay with where the direction they go with this, or I'm going to start really rolling my eyes soon. So I
Can can I thought I could bait you guys into talking about the art, and I think I failed again.
I was going to say something, but we got
Please,
sidetracked.
yeah, what do you guys think about the
I,
arts? Like, how is it helping to tell the story or hurting?
I was fine actually with the change in artist here, only because it's a flashback. And typically, when you have
Interesting.
a change of tempo or a change of perspective happen within a regular series and a new artist comes on, it's not very jarring because it actually complements a little bit the the change of storyline that you're experiencing. And so here we took a major step back where we're going to the origin. When we go back, of course, to current day, I would hope that the original artist, would return, and this wouldn't be a permanent change. But for a flashback story, to me, it actually complemented the storytelling.
Mm, that's really interesting. I love how an artistic change can it almost, like, recolors the story in a way, and that's so it sounds like it, like, sepias the flashback for you in a really
uh-huh.
complimentary
I
way.
I even
Yeah.
I liked this choice of artist because the representations of the older his original Batman incarnation were very retro. And
Mhm.
yeah, it reminded me, it felt a little Dick Sprang, but with maybe more grimy coloring or something. But like there were aesthetics there that felt almost golden age-ish to me. So I kind of dug this art choice.
Honestly, it's not that different from Dragata. There are certain artists that, would have been a radical departure, but the Gabriel Hernandez Walta is the one they got, and he's close enough that if you're not paying very close attention to the art, you might be able to read these in continuity and not notice a huge difference. Perhaps, or I guess if you're reading them on a monthly basis, if you read them back to back, you'd probably notice it pretty strongly. But it's even then, it's not. It's still very it's still very stylized. Both of them are very stylized. They're both kind of more cartooned, I guess. They're not trying to do um, anything close to photorealism or anything even in the neighborhood of it. It's very much a kind of cartooned take on things, the proportions on characters and faces and such.
The straight
Um,
on view, like the little those small little cozy panels where you're just looking at a character in a speech bubble, and that's it. I know you're familiar with that kind of
mhm,
register, Twitless. It felt very, it's coming from a very different zone, I think, of comics, which I think
mhm.
is very interesting to pair with Batman.
Yeah, it's. I'm still on the.
Uh-huh.
I think
It's only
for
one
this
issue. Yeah.
I think on the flashback, I think it's totally fine, and again, it's actually, like, kind of what you mentioned, it does using a different art style does help sepia tone. It does help, establish we've gone somewhere else, in the storytelling universe, and, like, so that really doesn't bug me at all. Um, I am a little concerned about if this were to be, like, the regular artist, though, so if they jump back to the present and he's just the new artist, uh, Dragata's work on this comic has been a large part, I think, of what is selling it. And I think that's
Yeah.
also that's indicated by the fact that Dragata still has a credit on the book, even though reading between the lines, I don't think he did a lot for this issue. They have him credited as plot. The script is still Scott Snyder. So it says plot Scott Snyder, Dragata, and then script Scott Snyder. So again, parsing that out, it's it's like they just wanted Dragata has an executive producer credit essentially. So I think it's very clear he's very important to the overall success of this book. So I think it's important to keep him on art. That being said, giving him a break, I guess. So 1 month he doesn't have to do the issue. Maybe that's what helps keep him doing the other elements of the story. Because when it comes to these types of serial comics, it's not just about the storytelling. It is about essentially, casting a group of people who are going to be making this for months if not years, and making sure that they can produce a set amount of pages. They have to produce like at least 24 pages, and that means over 100 drawings a month, right? It's kind of a wild thing. It's Comics are crazy when you think about it. Do 100 drawings every month, of extremely high quality. Do them fast and do them fast enough so that we can get you to change them if we have to. And it's kind of, when you think about what goes into them, it's kind of wild that we get them at all like this. And I don't know if you guys are familiar, Action Comics right now has switched to a weekly release schedule. So they're
Oh my
actually
goodness.
DC's actually has a run right now, and I only noticed it because my pull list started getting really, really big, and I was like, "Why is it? Why do I have so many comics?" It's because DC has started to release them now with even more frequency. So yeah, with that wonderful aside or tangent behind us, what are your concluding thoughts on Absolute Batman #4?
Yeah, I think I wasn't connecting until you guys were talking about it, that this is helping in particular a particular, kind of mini moment in this run that's very driven by flashbacks, and that might be one reason why it's resonating and why this feels like a more, like, self-reflecting kind of issue. That's very likely not an accident that they would pair a different artist with that particular, uh, side quest, so to speak. They very likely could have fit issue 4 in earlier or later in this run, and I I don't think I don't think it would have not worked. It probably would have worked no matter where you put this. So that probably says says a lot about the business machinations behind what it takes to put out a run at the level that DC's doing. Um, I think I can't think of strong reasons to not like it. I again like if the forefront of this issue is that there's interesting character development and makes you think about relationships between families and principles that are evolving and your relationship to your home in your town. If that just in general is what's bringing you to a comic, that's not a bad thing. It's just it's once again it's like a chin tapping moment with what my understanding is about what Batman as a franchise is supposed to be, and superhero comics as a genre is supposed to be. I'm drifting away from that. I feel like I'm leaving the outer atmosphere about what we're doing here, other than good story moments. So uh, remains to be seen what we get with issue 5.
So, in my opinion, social commentary, while interesting and relevant, and does make for good fodder for comic books, it doesn't make very good character development. And as much as the topics that are touched on in this issue do resonate with current day, this Batman or this Bruce Wayne, he's not tortured. And this quizzical approach he has to trying to understand this horrific event that occurred to him in his childhood that took a very dear loved one from his life and profoundly impacted him for his entire adulthood, to the point where he was out in the street dressing up as a bat, biting people's necks, then ultimately brings him to having to question society and to go in an inquisitive manner to find what the motivation of his killer, his father's killer, actually was, seemed very, as was said earlier, contrived. And I just don't connect or don't understand this character in any way. He seems to be there as a placeholder to give speeches, quite frankly, and not a very three-dimensional, fleshed out persona, someone that you could identify, understand, and relate to, which is tragic for a character with such rich history and deep beginnings that has had a huge impact on many comic readers and resonated with many people, many audiences for many, many years. Thank you very much for checking out the video. Subscribe, like, and stay tuned for more.